Following the establishment of the legendary Perseid dynasty at Mycenae and Perseus's long and successful rule, his eldest son Electrion had far from a peaceful reign. Although the Taphian War was supposed to be a minor revolt to be easily put down, it turned out to be a disaster for Electrion, who despite ultimately prevailing, had all of his 9 sons killed in the conflict. As his 10th son, Lecymnius was actually an illegitimate offspring by a Phrygian woman and therefore not allowed to succeed him, Electrion's son-in-law, Amphitryon of Therains, was put in charge of the Mycenaean forces and led a decisive attack against the retreating Taphians. The subsequent series of events would put an end to the Taphian revolt, but would also bring an end to Electrion's own rule and leave a vacuum eventually filled by his younger brother, Sthenelus. WanaxTV is a channel that walks you through the history of the Achaeans, from the early Greek Bronze Age settlements through their expansion, conflicts with the Mycenaean Greece, the Hittite Empire, the legendary Trojan War, and the great events of the heroic age, all the way through to the classical Greece, the Achaean League, and the wars against the Roman Republic. Please consider subscribing and sharing the video, as this is a one-person production and it greatly helps the visibility of the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. As Prince Amphitryon, who was to be married to Electrion's daughter Alcmene, became the leading Mycenaean general, the remaining Taphian forces quickly retreated to their islands and a decisive Mycenaean campaign was underway. Taphians were led by the 6 sons of Pterelaus, 5 of which were killed in the initial battle, together with the opposing 9 sons of the Mycenaean king. The only remaining Taphian prince, Everes, fled and subsequently disappeared from the further events, leaving Pterelaus to face the invading army of Amphitryon. The Mycenaean forces were now aided by other palatial centers, most notably by Creon, the ruler of Thebes, who joined Amphitryon's forces. Pterelaus, on the other hand, was aided by the Teleboians, a neighboring pirate tribe traditionally allied with Taphians. Although they had previously surprised the Mycenaean army and killed virtually all of Electrion's sons, Taphians and Teleboians were more piracy-oriented warriors and were no match for the royal contingents led by Amphitryon. The Taphian revolt was utterly crushed and Pterelaus killed by the Mycenaeans. Subsequently, Taphian and Teleboian realms were reorganized and became a part of a larger group of islands assigned to Amphitryon's ally Cephalus. It was this Cephalus that founded the Cephallenian ruling house, later famous for its ruler and a great hero, Odysseus. Although this war had dragged on and was much more costly than expected, the victory was secured, but the faith simply did not favor King Electrion. Upon Amphitryon's return to Mycenae, the High King Electrion met his fate and was killed by his son-in-law. Although the Greek mythology describes this event as an accident involving a club thrown by Amphitryon at one of the cows, the Mycenaean throne was left with no legitimate sons of Electrion to succeed him. The person who profited the most from this event was Electrion's younger brother, Sthenelus. who without much opposition from the other brothers, subsequently seized the throne for himself, becoming the new king of Mycenae. Amphitryon, despite being charged for the murder of a king, did not face death but was instead only exiled by Sthenelus to Thebes, another palace center filled with Amphitryon's allies. In Thebes, Amphitryon and Princess Alcmene had 2 children, one of which would become the most legendary hero of all Greece, Heracles. In Mycenae, Sthenelus encountered no challenges to his claim to the throne and was able to finally stabilize the situation. He had many of his relatives and allies installed to rule various regions throughout Greece, ensuring a long and steady reign. The reign of King Sthenelus, as most other events of the heroic age, were known from the oral tradition passed through the generations of ancient Greeks until the establishment of the Greek alphabet centuries later. The linear B script, which was used throughout Greece of the Bronze Age, typically did not deal with the political events of the time, but was merely used to keep track of taxes, good distribution, and similar administrative purposes. So it is very difficult to determine the exact historicity of the time and separate it from various legends that this time period is filled with. However, the Mycenaean Greece did achieve some stability in what corresponded to this time period. After the fall of Arzawa by the hands of the Hittite Empire towards the end of the 14th century BCE, the Achaeans were once again strong enough to engage in the political scene of western Anatolia. Mursili II, the king of Hatti who conquered Arzawa, was succeeded by his son Muwatalli II. As the conquered Arzawa had always been an Achaean ally in the past, a problem over the control of the surrounding territories soon arose between the king of Hatti and the king of Achaea. While the Hittites split the mainland territory of Arzawa into 3 client states, the nearby islands were under the Achaean control and were in the past always used as a safe shelter for the Arzawans and against the Hittites. As the Hatti apparently attempted to gain possession and secured some of the islands, the Achaeans were determined to deny the Hittite Empire any significant access to the Aegean Sea. The Achaean king sent a letter of correspondence to Muwatalli II, acknowledging Tudhalia's conquest of the Asuwa League more than a century before, but also stressing that since those old times, the former Asuwan islands had subsequently always belonged to the Achaean kings. And thus says His Majesty the Great King, King of Achaea, to the Great King of Hatti. In the previous year, my brother, the king of Hatti, wrote to me, "As for your islands that you now possess, the storm god gave them to me in subjugation. But the king of Asuwa, when he was defeated by your ancestor Tudhalia, my ancestor, king of Achaea, had before that already married the daughter of the king of Asuwa and gained possession of the islands. Then Tudhalia, your ancestor, defeated the king of Asuwa and subjugated him. So the islands had already belonged to the king of Achaea before that happened. And I have now written to you, my brother, on the account of this matter." This fragmentary text did not survive in its entirety, but it clearly shows that the Hittites attempted to gain possession of the several of the Aegean islands following their conquest of Arzawa. The Achaeans, however, despite previously being forced to extradite the remaining Arzawan princes to Mursili II, had no intention of giving any of their own territory to the Hittites, especially not the islands, essential for the Mycenaean domination of the Aegean Sea. The Hittites would ultimately not pursue the Aegean islands and instead shifted their attention to the east. As for the western Anatolia, the Hatti pursued the policy of securing loyalty from their clients and vassal states through numerous treaties. One of those treaties would ultimately trigger another conflict between the Achaeans and Hittites, as the great king of Hatti secured loyalty from a ruler of Velusa, in Greek rendering known as Ilion, or more famously, Troy. Please consider subscribing and sharing the video, as this is a one-person production and it greatly helps the visibility of the channel. Special thanks to History with Sai, Nico, and the State Care for their continuous support. If you wish to become a Patreon member, please follow the link in the video description. This was WanaxTV, and we'll see you again soon.